key regions, 3 key years when attention has been given to rural water supply maintenance in the national policies and strategies. The first one is the 2013, which is a WASH implementation framework, and also 5 years strategy, which we call One WASH National Program Phase 1. And during that time, it was like more of professionalizing WASH services without mentioning maintenance. It was like more focusing on new construction. And the second one was in 2018, where again, the second phase of the national WASH strategy revised, in which case professionalized maintenance was much stressed. Again, 2020 in the revised water resource management policy were about professionalizing maintenances, as well as the need for subsidizing maintenance services were clearly articulated. Based on all those national policies and strategies, there have been a number of efforts in terms of like improving rural water supply maintenance. And the first one was again like having a clear maintenance strategy framework in 2015, and the second one was having rural utility guideline in 2017, like recruiting water extension worker at sub-district level, which we call Qabale, and establishing revolving fund in different areas to sustain spare parts supply, piloting small and micro enterprises for rural water maintenance, and also policy revision. If we have looked at key drivers for all these it is about the complexity in technology, which is beyond the capacity of local government as well as community, and also the increase for better WASH services. Next slide, please. Of course, those efforts were not without challenges. There were gaps and the challenges. And the first one was the way how performances have been reported both on quarterly and annual basis from local government to the national government. And this reporting, performance reporting, is mainly focusing on coverage and access, like without relying much on the service level, and as well as without considering much the non-functionality. And the second one is, even if professionalized maintenance is supported by strategy and the policy, there is a limitation of capacity at different levels, at local and at national level. Capacity in terms of skills, capacity in terms of staffing, capacity in terms of budget to implement or to translate those policies and the strategy into practices. And the third challenge is, even if again, those strategies encourage learning, adaptation, innovation, and there is no really much room in terms of implementing those things. Rather, the focus was more on, again, on constructing new infrastructures. And lastly, it is about like lack of connection between different initiatives, and also lack of communication or familiarizing policies and the strategies from national level to district level. Next slide, please. So based on those identified gaps and the challenges, which we have already seen, the first step we picked to support us, like how to connect from local to national level in terms of like sharing evidences, in terms of sharing policies in practice. And another one is connecting from the federal level or national level to local level in terms of familiarizing those policies and the strategies. So in order to do this, we have used different platforms. One is connecting laterally For example, at district level, since WASH involves different actors there, we managed to connect those key actors at district level to learn from one another and also to share their challenges and also to share their proposed solutions. And again, we have been like organizing different policy dialogues and experience sharings, both in country as well as out of countries, engaging different policy makers. In doing that, again, we managed to maintain our continuous messaging and communication, mainly vertically through district, zone, region, and national level. So the key activities we have done here is like connecting horizontally those local actors as well as national actors to share their experiences and to discuss about the issues and the challenges. And also to share those local evidences, how policy looks like and how strategy looks like in practice from the district level to the national level. So this is on one hand helps to familiarize the policies and the strategies, and on another hand also just to share back to the national level the key challenges in implementing those policies and strategies. Next slide, please. Next one again. So if I pick two key achievements in doing that, one is previously there was no a dedicated unit or directorate to provide support for post-construction operation and maintenance of rural water supply. But later on, this restructuring from national to district level has came up with having a dedicated directorate or unit to provide support for post-construction. And the second one is the inclusion of professionalized maintenance and the need for subsidy in the revised water resource management policy in 2020. Of course, there are other key achievements, but these are the two main ones. Next slide, please. So as a recommendation, the first one is just we need to keep a momentum of translating policy and the strategy into practices. At the moment, we don't have much gaps in terms of policies and the strategy, and the big gap in translating those policies and the strategy into practices. And the second one is the need to establish mandatory incentive mechanism for a minimum required human capacity and the budget. This is, as I mentioned before, in order to implement the policy, there is a capacity gap at different levels, district, regions, and the zones. Then we need to set a minimum required staffing, skills, and annual budget for operation and the maintenance. And the third one is, so far our focus was mainly on decision makers within the sector. But there are politicians, there are decision makers who have roles and the voices on resources or budgets allocated for WASH. These policymakers are again beyond the WASH sector. So we need to have a political buy-in from those decision makers outside the sector, the WASH. And the next one is about having a minimum criteria for professionalized maintenance. Like for anyone, be it government or a donor, to fund rural water supplies, we need to have like a minimum criteria how to ensure professionalized maintenance in order to get those grants and supports. And lastly, again, even if innovations and the learnings are supported by policy and the strategy, we need to encourage on how to incorporate or accommodate those innovations and the learnings within rural water supply implementation. Thank you, Harold, back to you.
Okay, great, Lamesa. Thank you for that, sharing those lessons from what you've been doing in Ethiopia. And as I said at the beginning, I think this is more of an art than a science. It's, you know, it's a constant process of engagement and so on. Before opening up a bit to the floor, Heather Skilling has put in an interesting question around what kind of evidence or messages did you use to try and both engage but convince policymakers? And you mentioned also sort of getting political support outside the sector. So maybe there's a difference between the evidence you use for the wash sector, the one wash sort of players, or those outside it. Can you give some examples of what you've used? You know, is it around cost savings, around functionality, around what is it that you actually used in that process, just to make it a bit more specific, if you could?
Good, thank you. In pilot districts where we have been working, and the first activity we have undertaken was like undertaking inventory of rural water supply schemes, including the types of technology and also their status, whether they are functional or not. Like I mentioned before, the formally reported non-functionality rate is around 10%. But the actual figure we have got from the inventory we did in few districts were more than 35%. You can imagine the difference. So having those kinds of like alarming figure and bringing those actual figure to the national level is like a kind of awakening those policymakers. When I say we, those inventories were undertaken with the lead of Warada or district governments. So bringing those reality, those evidence, practical evidence from local to national level is really the starting point to convince those decision makers. But in terms of going beyond the sector, it's like about the contribution of WASH to health and also to well-being or human beings, and also the contribution of WASH for education, for productivity, and others. So this is actually what we need to work further in order to go and influence decision makers beyond the WASH sector.
Mm. So on one hand, a sort of a shock tactic almost to say, here is really what the reality is, and then perhaps for a broad audience, what the benefits are for having better services. We've got some messages coming in, some questions. So I'd like to stick with a couple of those for now, and then invite a colleague, your IRC colleague from Uganda, to sort of compare what's going on there with what's been happening in Ethiopia. I think there are some interesting contrasts. David Tetse from CRS asks about the national water strategy. At the time you were doing this work, whether or not it had a maintenance plan in it, and I think that refers in this case to the One Wash national strategy, probably, Lamesa. So how much of it, and as I recall, it doesn't have a huge amount of detail on maintenance, I think, but was it, how far was it taken into account in that strategy, and how did it change over time, or has it changed?
Okay, the first strategy was endorsed in 2013, which we call One Wash National Program Phase 1. In this case, there is no much or specific about professionalized maintenances, but of course maintenance issues was there. It says professionalizing WASH services. And again, the focus was mainly on increasing the coverage through constructing new infrastructure. But gradually in 2015, there was a national operation and maintenance strategy framework, and also endorsed by the national government, the Ministry of Water, Irrigation and Energy at that time. And again, in 2017, a rural utility guideline, again developed and endorsed by the Ministry of Water, Irrigation and Energy. In 2018, One Wash National Program, Phase 2, which is another the continuity of the first phase, has clearly indicated and included about professionalizing those rural water supply maintenances in terms of subsidy, in terms of support it needs to get. So if we have looked at the duration from 2013 to 2018, it is around like 5-6 years all together. But there have been some changes in between, like I mentioned, in 2015 and 2017. So it is a kind of gradually getting attention from policymakers as well.
So it's a continuous work in progress, then you have to keep pushing, keep pushing. Maybe one very quick question with hopefully a short answer before we ask your colleague from Uganda to join. This is from Madison Delamuth, if I say the right way. And I guess, Lemessa, this is really the true test. Are you getting more money for O&M through the government on the basis of this pushing, this engagement? Are they putting more money in? And I know Ethiopia is a huge country, so maybe with respect to where you're working, maybe not the whole country, but have you been able to increase finance for O&M? That's the basic question.
Okay, thank you. We have seen some increasing of budget in those districts where we have been working, but still that is not to the level it is expected. But at national level, it has been getting much attention. So instead of having more budget at the moment, and the focus is having more staffing and the skills who can use those resources whenever it will be available. So I can say there has been some changes also in terms of budget allocation so far.
Okay, good. And I just see there's a bit of a warning on time, so we may not be able to get to all the questions, but we'll pick them up and we'll provide written responses if we can't. I'm hoping now we can ask Jane Namunya, who's your counterpart in IRC in Uganda, to join. And Jane, maybe if you could put your video on, if that's possible, indicate that you're with us. And I know that, Jane, you've been, the situation in Uganda is probably several stages in advance of Ethiopia, in the sense that I think, Lemessa, you mentioned an O&M department being developed, and we know in IRC some years ago there was an O&M department set up within the ministry to really address these kind of things. And of course, a couple of years ago now, I think it was late 2019, Uganda produced a strategy for operations and maintenance. So what are the lessons that you can share with us vis-a-vis what Lemessa has just said about this political engagement and how to keep this on the agenda? Jane, I don't know if you can join us to give a few reflections on that from the Uganda perspective, please.
Thank you, Harold. Sorry, I will not be able to use my video, otherwise I'll lose my connection.
No problem, we hear you very well, so please continue.
I'm not working in the office, so thank you, Harold, and thank you, Lemessa, for sharing what's happening in Ethiopia. And very quickly, I think the most recent efforts for Uganda have been mainly two. One is what Harold has mentioned, the establishment of a full division, infrastructure operations and maintenance, in the Rural Water and Sanitation Department in the Ministry of Water and Environment. That was a big leap, and it was as a result of and recognition that there was need to have concerted efforts and focus by a team or a group in the Ministry of Water and Environment to specifically look at operations and maintenance in order to improve the functionality levels, particularly of rural water supplies. There were many concerns around the breakdowns, the delayed turnaround in terms of response, especially for those facilities. So that one was formed in 2015. It started operating in financial year 2015-2016, and it has a whole assistant commissioner, a full assistant commissioner with principal engineers and an O&M coordinator. So having that automatically was a show of confidence in that department to be able to establish a division, but also a vote. They got a budget vote. There is a separate budget vote that goes to the division to cater for the out-of-pocket fine, but also the staff costs, and also working with the district water officers, the hand pump mechanics associations, the scheme attendants and caretakers in the different districts. So that one's a big effort. And the second effort was the most recent one, the National Framework for Operation and Maintenance of Rural Water Infrastructure in Uganda. The framework was launched in July 2020, and it aims to guide the country, to guide the ministry on how to strengthen and streamline rural water operation and maintenance at all levels, and national with policy, but also in the districts with the actual implementation. And what is it that is it's bringing on board in terms of achievements? It's just started rolling out, because if it's July 2020, that's when this particular financial year we are in, that just ended in July. So it's really a rollout, the launch, the commissioning, and now the districts have, we are waiting for an instrument to direct the districts to form the boards, district water boards, but it's also a way of professionalizing the way community-based management should be done and handing down the implementation.
Jane, I'm afraid we have to close the session in 1 minute, but just very quickly in that last 60 seconds.
I'm through, Harold.
Can you tell us what do you think it was that got you to that point? What was the political kind of push and engagement around the ministry? Was it through parliamentarians? Was it the ministry? Any insights on that before we close?
It was through the ministry, the technical people, the engineers there, the hydrogeologists, the hydrologists, who really felt that O&M was not given due attention. It wasn't getting money. It didn't have focused staff handling O&M, and yet we had stagnated at 85% for 4 years, from 2014 to 2018. We are just in the 80s, 80%, not moving up and not even moving down. So that was a big concern.
So it was the technocratic leadership that sort of pushed it. Lemessa, any last comment? Just 20 seconds you have. I'm sorry, we have to get back to the other room.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Harold. So in the case of Ethiopia, I think our next step is really about enforcing policy and the strategy implementation, and really, even if it is not like 100% complete, but nearly 95% policies and the strategies are okay at the moment. So working on their implementation is really
keep pushing. You need to keep pushing for the rollout. So thank you to you, Lemessa, and thank you, Jane, for joining the discussion. I think we're out of time, and it's going to take a few moments to retranslate back to the blue jeans. Let's try and we close out the Zoom. I think the idea is you shut off your Zoom and go back to your blue jeans. And if you've logged out, there is a link here in the message from Wendy. She just put it in just now. So in case you lose the blue jeans link, there it is again. So you might want to copy that or click on it now, or just go back to blue jeans. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you back in the main room.